Hi everyone, welcome to today's quick fix. We're going to talk about the difference between cold pressed and hot pressed watercolour paper today. They are the two types of paper that tend to dominate the variations in watercolour paper. You will also get loads more sort of variations within the cold pressed range, but on the whole, for me, I find that cold pressed is really good for doing more sort of smooth washes, using lots of water, allowing the paint to seep into the paper and make a lovely smooth blend. And hot pressed is much better for detailed work, and let me tell you why. So cold pressed has more of a texture to it. It picks up and soaks in the water really beautifully and smoothly and holds it in there, whereas hot pressed is much smoother, and you could almost see the paint sitting on top of the paper as opposed to being absorbed in quite as smoothly and seamlessly as cold pressed. So let me show you a few examples of cold pressed paper first. So this is the textured paper, and here is a really loose watercolour painting that I did a few tutorials ago, really using wet, dilute, loose styles of painting, really looking for the water to do a lot of the work, and you can see beautiful crisp edges, and on the whole the paint has gone really beautifully smoothly onto the paper and there aren't too many issues with the blend. Here's another good example of when cold pressed paper is really fantastic to use when you have large expanses of very, very dilute washes that you need to be smooth as possible. So cold pressed paper is absolutely fantastic for this kind of painting. It's also really good for landscapes, things like this tree painting here, these lovely trees in the background just done by using the beautiful absorption of water that cold pressed paper has. So let's have a look at hot pressed paper. So put my cold pressed to one side. So beautifully smooth. This is the kind of thing that I paint on hot pressed paper. So this is a very detailed picture of a carousel, loads of little sort of tiny weeny bits with the brush, and I just needed to be able to paint in all this detail without the sort of disturbance, I suppose, of the texture of the cold pressed paper. Here is another little one, and you can see the scale of what I paint on hot pressed paper is just so much smaller than cold pressed. Again, this was a commission of a wedding cake, a really amazing wedding cake, but again, I needed to be able to get in there with a little brush and do lots of detail. On both of these, there isn't so much sort of classic watercolour blending. I'm using the paint in a quite dry, concentrated manner. So what I wanted to do today is do a little experiment with the two types of paper so that you can see, like for like, how they react. I've got my cold pressed paper first, and I've got a size 4 pointed round brush, and I am going to paint some colour blend circles, which is really one of my favourite things to do. So I've begun with some wet but quite colourful permanent rose, and I am painting very wet watercolour circles of paint, and I am relying on the paper to be the best vehicle for the water to seep in quite seamlessly to the page, and also to allow me to paint brush strokes like that that won't sort of get picked up and look too sort of scratchy. I want to be able to paint in brush strokes and not see a load of sort of back and forth lines of my brush going back and forth. You see, these are all looking really smooth, really beautiful, and also we're using lots of water, but you can see pretty much we've got very smooth blends, very smooth transitions from circle to circle. I will just paint in one or two more whilst we're at it, because it's a really fun exercise to do. But cold pressed paper loves this kind of painting. when you've got a sort of decent amount of water and you're just needing the colours to blend. You want them to blend smoothly and seamlessly, but you don't want the colours to muddy. Cold pressed paper will be brilliant for just allowing these blends to happen, allowing the water to seep in really nicely. Okay, so I'm going to put that to one side, and we're now going to try the same exercise on the hot pressed paper. I'm going to move that out the way, and then I can just put that here to remind us of what we're comparing to. So one of the things that's going to be a little bit tricky to convey in a screen is the sort of the feeling I get when I'm painting on hot press, because already it's almost like the brush is sliding over the paper because there's no friction here. There's no no friction, meaning that there's nothing slowing the brush down, so it's sort of sliding around. And it almost sounds different, actually. So yeah, at the moment it's going quite nicely, but as soon as things start to dry, and you can see with the paint, if I sort of get my brush in there too much, it's just moving it around over the surface of the paper. It's not really seeped in very much to the page itself. And you can also see just a slightly uneven edge on that orange circle there. Let's see what happens if I do this. Again, I can just feel like the paint is just sat on top of the page, hasn't seeped in beautifully. And again, if I'm wanting to sort of try and move it around, it's not quite doing it. And you can also see the paper just bobbling up a tiny bit if I disturb it too much with my brush, which of course is the general rule with watercolour, is to try not to disturb your paint too much. But with hot pressed paper, you often find that you're just trying to move it around and get it to do what you want it to do, because it's a little bit more, well, it doesn't really react so much to the watercolour because the watercolour is sort of sat on top of it. Now if I went back to try and do a circle here, I'm not going to be in much luck, so I can try and wake up that colour, but it's just gone a bit flat over here. And you can see that if I try and wake that colour up to blend it in, all I'm doing is sort of skimming it off the surface of the previous circle, so it just shows how much that paint has not really seeped in to the page. Okay, I think we've seen enough. So if I just put the two next to each other then. Don't know why, for some reason I like looking at them like that. There we go. Okay, so a few things that I notice. On this one I can see brush strokes a little bit more. I can see that the paper's been disturbed, and I can see areas where if I had a little bit more water than maybe I should have done, the page didn't really handle it very well. It's sort of pooled in the middle here, whereas on the cold press, doing these lovely sort of loose water circles, it handles it so much better. So you can see, and the colour is more vibrant as well, which I find really interesting. It just seems to suit using water for watercolour much better. So that's not to say hot press isn't a brilliant type of paper. This is perfect for painting really detailed little illustrations that maybe don't require too much actual watery blend of watercolour, and cold pressed is the best if you want to really stretch your loose watercolour muscle and paint with lots of water and see lots of beautiful blends. I really hope that's been helpful. I've listed below the two brands I've used today. They're both Winsor & Newton professional quality watercolour paper, so they're both at the same quality level and made by the same manufacturer, just so we had a fair fight here. And I really hope that is helpful for you moving forward with your watercolour painting.